At 3:17 a.m., Evan's camera captured what fire truly hungers for. The burning figure stared back through his lens, its charred face splitting into a Glasgow smile as it reached through the viewfinder with fingers of ember and ash. I am the Nightmare Maestro, and tonight's tale will make you question every photograph you've ever taken of flames and what might be watching you through them. The figure disappeared when Evan lowered his camera, but its smile remained burned into his retinas. 3 years since he'd quit firefighting, and now something was wrong with his photos. Each shot of the distant wildfires showed people standing in the flames, their bodies untouched, their eyes reflecting firelight like mirrors. His laptop screen flickered as another email arrived from Pacific Coast magazine. They wanted wildfire photos from Pacific Palisades, raw, visceral shots capturing California's savage beauty. The kind only someone intimate with flame could capture, the kind that brought back screams he couldn't forget. Evan's hands shook as he scrolled through tonight's shots. The burning figures appeared clearer with each frame, their faces increasingly familiar. In the final photo, he recognized the family he'd failed to save 3 years ago. The mother pointed directly at his lens, her mouth open in a silent scream. The image corrupted before his eyes, digital artifacts spreading like cancer across his screen. But beneath the distortion, words formed, "Come back to the fire, we've been waiting." His phone buzzed, the magazine editor's final deadline. The pay would cover 6 months' rent in his rundown Venice apartment. All he had to do was spend 3 nights photographing the wildfire threatening Pacific Palisades. Through his window, the distant blaze painted the sky blood red. Evan's gaze drifted to the box under his bed containing his old uniform and journal. As he reached for it, ash began falling through his closed window, settling in the shape of handprints on his desk. Each print smoldered with inner light, forming a trail toward his camera. The clock struck 11. His camera's display showed one last image, his own face in the flames, smiling that same terrible smile. He typed his response with trembling fingers. "I'll take the assignment." Behind him, in the reflection of his dark window, something moved that wasn't there when he turned around. The abandoned hiking lodge crouched against the smoke-stained sky like a predator waiting to strike. Its windows reflected the approaching wildfire in unnatural ways, each pane showing a different angle of the flames despite facing the same direction. Evan's boots crunched on blackened vegetation that shouldn't have burned yet. The fire was still miles away. Marisol, the park ranger, stood rooted by her vehicle, her flashlight beam refusing to touch the building's facade. "Something's wrong with this place," she said, voice tight with controlled fear. "Last month, 2 hikers came up here to photograph the sunset. We found their cameras 3 days later, memory cards full of impossible images. The hikers," she swallowed hard, "we found teeth marks in their bones, teeth made of ash." A sound like distant screaming echoed through the canyons. Through his viewfinder, Evan watched shadows move behind the lodge's windows, humanoid shapes that walked on ceilings and walls. His camera's display glitched, showing fragments of other times. The lodge pristine, the lodge burning, the lodge with its walls weeping something darker than water. "The fires always come here first," Marisol continued, pulling out a weathered logbook. "Even when they start miles away, they find paths that shouldn't exist." She thrust the book into his hands. "Read the last entry, the one written in smoke." The final page contained a single sentence that writhed like living ink. "It's not a lodge anymore. It's a mouth, and it remembers how you taste." A hot wind surged down from the hills, carrying the scent of burning flesh. Evan's camera captured the lodge's true shape for a split second. Not wood and nails, but sinew and bone, its entrance a throat lined with teeth of splintered timber. The image corrupted instantly, leaving burned marks on his screen. Marisol's radio crackled with static and voices. Multiple casualties. Structure fire at impossible temperatures. "They're still screaming in the..." She switched it off with shaking hands. "That broadcast is from 3 years ago. It plays every night here. One more thing, she called as she retreated to her vehicle. If you see someone you know in the flames, someone who died in fire, run. They're not who they used to be. They're what the fire made them. As her taillights disappeared, the lodge's shadow stretched against natural light, reaching for Evan like grasping fingers. The logbook burned cold in his hands, and somewhere inside, floorboards creaked with footsteps that fell in perfect sync with his heartbeat. The lodge swallowed Evan whole. The moment he stepped inside, the entrance sealed behind him, wood grain flowing like liquid to fill the gap. His flashlight beam caught particles floating in the air, not dust, but fragments of burned photographs, each showing a different moment of someone's final screams. At 2:47 a.m., his camera captured what the lodge had become. The walls breathed, expanding and contracting with wet, meaty sounds. Corridors stretched like intestines, pulsing with bioluminescent veins of ember. Every surface writhed with images, burning bodies, collapsing buildings, faces twisted in eternal agony. Movement caught his eye. Through the viewfinder, he saw a figure standing at the corridor's end, silhouetted against the hellish glow. It wore his old firefighting gear, but wrong, the uniform had become a second skin, melted into flesh that glowed from within. The figure's head turned with a sound like crackling timber. "Your pictures captured our true face," it spoke, voice like smoke and gravel. "Now we'll capture yours." The camera's screen erupted in static, then showed rapid-fire images, his past failures, but wrong, scenes where he'd chosen to let people burn, where he'd smiled as they screamed. None of it had happened that way. The images began moving, his photographed self turning to face him through the screen with ember eyes. His journal materialized on a nearby table, its pages fluttering open. The sketches inside had changed, become animated like living things. The family he'd failed to save crawled between the pages, their charred fingers reaching out into the real world, leaving burning marks on reality itself. The floor beneath him softened, becoming organic, trying to draw him in. Through dissolving floorboards, he glimpsed a massive gullet lined with teeth of bone and timber. The lodge wasn't just haunted, it was transforming, becoming a fusion of structure and flesh, feeding on guilt and grief to fuel its metamorphosis. The burning figure approached, its movements jerky and wrong, like a marionette pulled by strings of flame. "We watched you run," it said, its face beginning to mirror Evan's own features. "Watched you hide behind that camera while we burned. But fire remembers, Evan, and we're hungry." The walls wept liquid flame that ate through reality like acid, revealing the truth beneath the lodge's skin, an infinite space of burning bodies, all wearing his face, all reaching, all smiling, that terrible smile he'd seen in his first photograph. The lodge shuddered with anticipation. Its newest meal had finally come home. Evan ran, but physics had abandoned the lodge's corridors. Each door opened onto the same room from different angles, a nursery he recognized from 3 years ago. Smoke-stained wallpaper peeled away in strips of skin, revealing muscle-like tissue that pulsed with trapped firelight. Teddy bears watched from shelves with ember eyes, their stuffing leaking ash. His radio, the one he'd stopped carrying years ago, screamed to life with impossible frequencies. Through bursts of static, he heard his own voice overlapped with others. "Let us burn, should have stayed. Become the flame." The voices synchronized into a harmony that made his teeth vibrate and his vision blur. The burning figure pursued him through reality's broken geometry, but now it split and multiplied with each step, dozens of versions of himself, each showing a different way fire could reshape human flesh. Some crawled on walls like insects, others flowed like living flame. All wore his face in various stages of combustion. His camera caught fragments of truth through its corrupted lens. The lodge wasn't just consuming space, it was consuming time. Through each warped doorway, he glimpsed moments from every fire he'd ever fought, but twisted. Victims reaching through windows with arms of smoke, children laughing as their skin became ember, rescue teams wearing faces made of flame. The nursery's rocking chair began its motion, creaking out a lullaby of splintering wood. In it sat what remained of the mother he'd failed to save, her charred form cradling something that squirmed and crackled in burning blankets. She turned to him with a face of coal and starlight, crooning, "Come see the baby, Evan. See what your guilt made it become." Reality fractured like heated glass. The walls shed their pretense of structure, becoming transparent membranes that showed the lodge's true anatomy, a massive throat lined with eyes of fire, each one reflecting a different version of his failures. The floor rippled with peristaltic waves, trying to draw him deeper into the organism the building had become. His own reflection in a shattered mirror began to move independently, reaching through the glass with hands of slag and cinder. "Stop fighting," it whispered, in a voice of smoke and regret. "Let the fire unmake you. Let it rebuild you in its image." The air itself began to burn. Evan ran, but physics had abandoned the lodge's corridors. Each door opened onto the same room from different angles, a nursery he recognized from 3 years ago. Smoke-stained wallpaper peeled away in strips of skin, revealing muscle-like tissue that pulsed with trapped firelight. Teddy bears watched from shelves with ember eyes, their stuffing leaking ash. His radio, the one he'd stopped carrying years ago, screamed to life with impossible frequencies. Through bursts of static, he heard his own voice overlapped with others. "Let us burn, should have stayed. Become the flame." The voices synchronized into a harmony that made his teeth vibrate and his vision blur. The burning figure pursued him through reality's broken geometry, but now it split and multiplied with each step. Dozens of versions of himself, each showing a different way fire could reshape human flesh. Some crawled on walls like insects, others flowed like living flame. All wore his face in various stages of combustion. His camera caught fragments of truth through its corrupted lens. The lodge wasn't just consuming space, it was consuming time. Through each warped doorway, he glimpsed moments from every fire he'd ever fought, but twisted. Victims reaching through windows with arms of smoke, children laughing as their skin became ember, rescue teams wearing faces made of flame. The nursery's rocking chair began its motion, creaking out a lullaby of splintering wood. In it sat what remained of the mother he'd failed to save, her charred form cradling something that squirmed and crackled in burning blankets. She turned to him with a face of coal and starlight, crooning, "Come see the baby, Evan. See what your guilt made it become." Reality fractured like heated glass. The walls shed their pretense of structure, becoming transparent membranes that showed the lodge's true anatomy, a massive throat lined with eyes of fire, each one reflecting a different version of his failures. The floor rippled with peristaltic waves, trying to draw him deeper into the organism the building had become. His own reflection in a shattered mirror began to move independently, reaching through the glass with hands of slag and cinder. "Stop fighting," it whispered, in a voice of smoke and regret. "Let the fire unmake you. Let it rebuild you in its image." The air itself began to burn. Evan's blood ignited. Each heartbeat pumped liquid fire through his veins, transforming arteries into channels of molten light. He fought against the change, but his skin had begun to crack like cooling magma, revealing networks of ember pulsing beneath. Through dissolving eyes, he watched his fingers elongate into twisted branches of burning bone. The creature's laugh shattered nearby windows, the glass shards transforming into burning moths that swarmed him. Each touch left new mutations, patches of skin becoming translucent, revealing the lodge's corruption spreading through his body like cancer. His screams came out as gouts of flame. "Fighting only makes it sweet," the thing wearing his guilt said, its form constantly shifting between his past victims. "Your resistance feeds the transformation. Every denial becomes new fuel for the fire's hunger." The lodge's deeper anatomy responded to his struggle. Walls sprouted appendages of timber and tendon, grabbing him with hands made from reclaimed flesh and splintered bone. The floor became a mouth, trying to swallow him into its digestive chambers, where other firefighters were still being processed, their bodies suspended in stages between human and flame. His camera, now fused to his transforming hands, showed him the truth through its melting lens. The wildfire outside wasn't approaching the lodge. The lodge was spreading into the world, infecting reality with its hunger. Every photo he'd taken had been a seed, preparing the way for its expansion. The creature flowed closer, its body now a twisting amalgamation of every guilt-ridden soul it had consumed. "Your memories were just the beginning," it said, reaching into his chest with fingers of living flame. "Your fear fed us, your guilt shaped us, but your acceptance will unleash us." Evan's spine cracked and reformed, trying to reshape him into something that could survive in the lodge's toxic atmosphere. His lungs filled with smoke that moved with purpose, colonizing him from within. The transformation reached his brain, showing him visions of what he would become, a new appendage of the lodge's vast organism, a hunter of guilty souls. Through the pain, a single thought burned brighter than the fire trying to claim him. What if guilt wasn't his to carry? What if the flames that haunted him were never his to fight? The lodge screamed as this new resistance took hold, its carefully constructed narrative cracking like superheated glass. The revelation hit Evan like a backdraft. His memories of that night shattered, revealing the truth beneath. He hadn't failed to save that family they had never wanted saving. They'd been part of the lodge's feeding cycle, cultists who surrendered themselves to the flame. His guilt had been engineered, planted like a seed to draw him back to this place of transformation. "You're not my failure," he snarled, through lips that dripped molten copper. "You're not even my fire." The creature recoiled, its form destabilizing. The lodge's flesh walls pulsed erratically as their carefully constructed narrative began to unravel. Evan's camera, now grafted to his burning hands, captured the moment of weakness, a single frame showing the thing's true form, ancient and desperate and hungry. "We are what fire remembers," it hissed through 1,000 burning mouths. "We are what guilt creates. We are your parasites." Evan cut through its litany, each word igniting the air, feeding on guilt that was never yours to claim. The lodge's structure buckled as truth fought fiction. Through gaps in its dissolving walls, Evan glimpsed its true history, an ancient entity that had worn many faces, always feeding on human guilt, always twisting memories to create the perfect prey. Fire was just its latest mask. Evan's transformation reversed violently, burning flesh falling away to reveal human skin beneath. His camera fused with his firefighter's journal, creating something new, a lens that could capture truth instead of corrupted memory. Through it, he saw the lodge's desperate final gambit. Reality fractured like burning paper, showing glimpses of other versions of himself, ones who had accepted the transformation, become part of the lodge's eternal hunger. They reached for him with bodies of beautiful flame, promising release from guilt, offering power and purpose. But in his last photo, displayed on his camera's cracking screen, Evan saw what he needed to see: the family, already changed, already willing sacrifices before he'd ever arrived. Their faces were ecstatic, not afraid. Their transformation had been their choice, not his failure. "My guilt is my own," he said, fingers finding the lodge's structural weakness, the point where truth met deception, "and I choose what burns." The lodge screamed in frequencies that shattered reality. As dawn broke over Pacific Palisades, hikers would find the building standing empty, its windows reflecting nothing but morning light. But Evan's last photo, the one he could never show the magazine, captured something else, a creature of ancient hunger, wearing borrowed guilt like armor, searching for its next feast. In his apartment mirror that night, Evan watched embers dance behind his eyes and smiled, not with guilt, but with understanding. Some fires don't consume you, they reveal, and some truths burn brighter than flame. If tonight's tale has you looking twice at every flame you photograph, remember, fire isn't always what destroys us. Sometimes it's the guilt we carry that consumes us from within. Share your own firefighter stories in the comments below, or tell us about times when you felt something watching you through your camera lens. Don't forget to subscribe to the Nightmare Maestro and ignite that notification bell to ensure you never miss a horrifying tale. After all, there are countless more stories where guilt takes physical form. Until next time, stay safe, and remember, when you stare into the flames, something ancient and hungry might be staring back.